Hello everybody, my name is Spoons Rattling, and welcome to my video on the strengths and weaknesses of each of the Chaos Legions and creations of Bile and Red Corsairs if you want to argue semantics. Regardless, this is just going to be my personal opinions, sort of evaluating all of the things that make up the different legions and where they sort of place in terms of power. Of course, when it comes to a list like this, it's very subjective, and I think you can make arguments for things to be higher, for things to be lower. Anyways, let's get on to the first legion, which is the Emperor's Children. Their playstyle are accurate melee weapons and heavy weapon fire, as they get to ignore weapon skill and ballistic skill modifiers. So they're very good with things like power fists and thunder hammers, though those are kind of rare in the army. Their pros, they have a rather strong legion trait, again, ignoring weapon skill and ballistics skill modifiers, and getting extra AP on massed attacks is very strong from something like Chosen or Possessed, who really benefit from it. They have very strong stratagems to buff big anvil units like Terminators, making them a nightmare to fight, and they also get ultra consistent charges out of Deep Strike, which they can get a D6 plus 6, which is very nice. Their cons are pretty much their warlord traits and relics aren't the strongest, except for maybe one of each. Having to pay for the Mark of Slaanesh on everything that can mean this army has a lot less points to play with, as paying 15 points on your troops, your havocs, etc. It just really does cost a lot at the end of the day, and makes all the units a good bit more fragile, which I think is generally a con. I'd say their strength in the army is rather middle tier. They can definitely be strong, but I think others do melee better. But that is the Emperor's Children, a decent legion. I just don't think quite the strongest. Then next up is the Iron Warriors. Their playstyle is long-range devastation and ultra-powerful buffed vehicles. Their pros, one of their strongest things that I think is sometimes overlooked is they buff the weaker sections of the codex, like tanks and dreadnoughts. And since the normal Chaos battle line is so strong on its own, I think this is actually what makes Iron Warriors very strong, as it elevates the other options to be even stronger, giving the army more options and overall more power. One thing that I noticed while doing my research is they could make a Leviathan where pretty much every single attack is doing at a minimum 4 damage and is being healed and very accurate, etc. Their cons, they can be a bit focused on characters, which means sniping them can be very effective. The sniping isn't the most common thing, except for maybe eliminators or death jesters. Aside from them, you won't actually run into many snipers that are efficient enough to take down a Space Marine character. But if those characters are shot down or something like that, it can be very painful. Their Legion trait is it's very situational, turns off rerolls, and ignores cover. The ignores cover is very strong and usually useful, but not always. And then rerolling wounds is situational, but even more powerful, as it can ruin some weapons, like, say, Lightning Claws. In terms of their strength level, I'd say they're in the very high middle tier, borderline on top tier. I think Iron Warriors are an army to look at that could be very powerful. Then next up is the Night Lords. Their playstyle involves manipulating leadership with fast-moving units and general disruption. They do have very flexible units that are hard to pin down, as they can return to reserves or fall back, and can make it so your units can't fall back, stuff like that. And that's about it. In terms of cons, their Legion trait is obscenely situational. Only army I can see it being very effective against is Orcs, and even then, I don't think they're going to be hitting significantly harder against them anyways than any other Legion would. Their relics and warlord traits are some of the worst in the book, and their stratagems in general are just weak. And that's kind of saying something when it's their strongest trait. Their strength, I think they are far and away the weakest army in the Codex, which is unfortunate. I think they should have been stronger, buffed more. But as they're just really weak. They have some good combos, but Black Legion kind of does them better, and Word Bearers does the other one better. So Night Lords really aren't the best at anything, which is a real shame. On a more upbeat note, we have the Word Bearers. Their playstyle mostly revolves around buffing strong melee units like Possessed, and then they get in there and hit with immensely accurate and devastating power. They have a very strong Legion trait. It gives consistent melee and durability against the increasingly common and dangerous mortal wounds. I think they have some of the best relics and warlord traits in the book. The demon weapons are really strong and give them good competition. But these guys their relics and warlord traits are monstrous. They have good stratagems as well that make their shooting more dangerous. Honestly, I think they're probably the most well-rounded, and they don't have any exclusive shooting synergies. That's not really a con. It's more so just the way their army is focused. I think they could easily take the cake for the best in the book for just being devastating in pretty much every situation. Next up is the Black Legion. They're very well-rounded, and they have a very strong Legion trait. They have good shooting at close range and accurate melee when they charge in. Abaddon is a monster. Harkin is a very solid and only remaining jump pack HQ, which makes Raptors extremely dangerous, really putting the Night Lords to shame. They have some very decent stratagems. I think their biggest drawback is mediocre relics and warlord traits, spare for a couple that allow for strong positioning. But honestly, I think they're very strong alongside the Word Bearers, easily top tier. Then next we have the Alpha Legion, my personal favorite legion and the army I play. They keep their fire support far away and safe, and have melee units that can charge in and then fall back and charge again, and allow the other units to shoot into any survivors. One of their biggest pros is their Legion trait, while seeming conflicted, is actually just quite flexible. And it just makes that their front line's very fast moving and flexible, as I've said, and their ranged fire support is kept very safe. They have very strong stratagems that I think you need to use to their fullest to make Alpha Legion really powerful. And I'd say that their relics and warlord traits are across the board quite mediocre. It's just not very strong, except for a redeployment one, and there's a relic I'm forgetting. But I'd say their strength puts them in the lower middle tier, though they definitely can be strong. But similar to Genestealer Colts, you need to know what you're doing with them to make them really strong. Next up, we're moving on to the smaller legions. We have the Red Corsairs. A very strong legion trait. Advance and charge is always good and always will be. They have bikes that are practically impossible to kill in melee that will hit hard in melee. And they have a unit that they have a warlord trait that lets them move a unit after they shoot. So they move out of cover, shoot, move back into cover, and just keep doing that, giving you essentially free damage. And then I'd say their biggest con, and they share this with the Creations of Bile, is limited stratagem, relic, and warlord trait support, as they're sort of like a sub-faction. Though I'd still say they fit into the upper middle tier, like below Iron Warriors, but right around the Emperor's Children. And then finally, we have the Creations of Bile. The strengths, they have a very powerful Legion trait, just +1 strength, +1 movement. It just really makes them quite powerful in melee. All of their units are very fast, which allows you to get to quarters of the table. It makes things just really easy to do. Like, you can get from one side of the table to the other much quicker, get places to do objectives, deliver melee units much easier, and honestly, I think that's one of their strongest, if not their strongest, attribute. And then Fabius Bile himself is quite strong, solid melee threat, and he can enhance units that can make use of pretty much all the buffs he can give, even though they're random. He's just in general, I think, a great pick to bring if you're playing Creations of Bile. And then, similar to the Red Corsairs, as I said, limited stratagem and relic warlord support. But still, I'd say their strength is upper middle tier. I think that just hitting things really hard and being very easy to get there is just a recipe for success in most places. I believe you can get some ridiculous strength values out of Creations of Bile, but yeah, I just think they're very strong in general. That wraps up all the main things. I'd say the top tier, Word Bearers and Black Legion, then followed probably by Iron Warriors, Creations of Bile, Red Corsairs, Emperor's Children, Alpha Legion in the middle tier, and then at the very bottom, Night Lords. I'd say that's pretty reasonable. I think most people would agree with that. And when I say Night Lords at the bottom, I think Night Lords are decently behind everything else in this codex. It's a real shame. They're just not efficient. They have practically no Legion trait against the majority of armies. Their stratagems are okay, but not great. Warlords and relics, again, not great. And losing jump pack lords probably hurt them the most, as raptors are their main thing. And when raptors are better in Black Legion, because Harkin gives them full rerolls to hit and wound, which makes them monstrous, it's kind of sad that the guys that made the raptors aren't even that good with them. But anyways, again, I've been your host, Spoons Rattling. I hope you enjoyed this video. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll talk to you all next time.